Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Leveraging Your Veeva Vault Investment. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout this presentation by using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Daylight Solutions, who developed the content for this presentation. Daylight Solutions is an IT consulting company that is relentlessly focused on meeting the enterprise information challenges of the life sciences industry. Centered on delivering meaningful outcomes and value for clients, Daylight has an expert team of life sciences IT specialists with decades of experience in the space. Daylight provides clients in the pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical devices industries with services that ensure IT projects begin with the real world in mind. Daylight Solutions is based in Princeton, New Jersey. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your speakers for today's webinar. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Dan Wheeler. He is the founder and CEO of Daylight Solutions. With more than 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur, senior executive, and management consultant, Dan enjoys tackling enterprise information management solutions for the life science industry. He is passionate about earning the trust and confidence of Daylight Solutions customers while providing unparalleled technology strategy and delivery service. He earned a bachelor's degree in computer science from the College of New Jersey and an MBA from Rider University. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your second speaker, and she is Terry Motez, the clinical practice lead for Daylight Solutions. Terry is a strategic partner for clinical regulatory and TMF operations in IT. For Daylight, she enjoys tackling challenging timelines and accelerating implementation opportunities for the IT and business teams of the major generic pharmaceutical companies. Her work is focused on the implementation of Veeva eTMF Vault. Teresa holds a bachelor's degree in public administration from Westchester University and a master's in computer science from Villanova University. Now it's my pleasure to pass over the mic and the controls over to our first speaker, and he is Dan. So Dan, when you're ready, you may begin.
Sonia, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity today for having Daylight speak about one of our favorite topics, Veeva Vault. So just a bit more about Daylight Solutions. Like Sonia mentioned, we're an IT consulting company, but we work exclusively with life sciences customers of all sizes. So that may range from your 100-person biotech startup to your 100,000-person large pharma company. We offer a wide range of services from strategy and advisory, implementation, migration, and ongoing support. While we work with a lot of different technologies, we are Veeva Vault experts. We have 2 certifications, one being the Preferred Services Partner, and then our migration certification, which only a handful of companies throughout the world have. We have experience with a lot of the development cloud solutions, such as clinical, regulatory, and quality, in addition to experience with PromoMats. Today we'll focus on 3 main topics. First, I'll walk us through our typical customer journey that they have with Veeva Vault. I'll then talk about a framework for maximizing your Vault investment, and then I'll turn it over to Terry, who will offer our insights based on real world experience on how you could further maximize your Vault investment. Most Vault journeys start out on a similar path, and this probably could be said for a lot of SaaS-based solutions. First, you typically would have a planning and design phase where you select your product, you assemble a team, and put together a project plan. You move into configuration and build. You hold a series of workshops. You configure your Vault solution, and that typically involves running process exercises and a number of iterations until you get the configs right before configuration lock. You may decide to integrate with other systems, and you may decide to migrate legacy content or data. Testing. Your tech team will perform system testing. Your business will perform user acceptance testing. All of your validation documents are ready and approved. And then we get into more production readiness. We have our SOPs and our work instructions are ready. Our business is trained. Our IT support staff is trained. The production system is ready. Everyone's prepared. Everyone's excited. And then we go live. A job well done. Certainly, and it's cause for celebration, right? You probably should have a parade. It's a lot of hard work. However, I think a lot of us know really go live is not the end of our journey, but really just the beginning. So if we think about this journey that you'll be on with Veeva Vault, you'll have your 3 annual releases. You'll most likely have user-specific enhancements that they want to make to the system outside of functionality that comes with the Vault release. Shifts in business direction or priorities. So maybe you're going to acquire a company. Maybe you need to or want to divest a product line or two. Maybe your clinical operations team is looking to insource the management of the trial master file from CROs. Any number of things. Future integration. So maybe when you first implemented Vault Quality Docs, you decided to defer that integration with your learning management system, deferring it to a future phase. Additional Vault Suite. So maybe initially you implemented Vault Quality Suite, and now you're looking to expand into Vault Clinical, Regulatory, or Safety. Additional Vault applications. So maybe you started with Vault Clinical, specifically eTMF, and now you're looking to add on CTMS. Networking to partner vaults and applications. So very relevant in the clinical space. Perhaps today you're managing your eTMF in a sponsor vault, and you have your sites and investigators coming into your vault. But perhaps now they've adopted, Vault site, for managing documents that are locally at the sites, and rather than exchanging documents through emails or having them come into your vault, you implement Site Connect to be able to exchange content and data between sponsor and sites. Also, we know that Veeva is coming out with a patient application, MyVeeva, where patients will be able to report their own outcomes. This slide may seem very busy and chaotic. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Think back to the days where we were implementing on-premise solutions that would take years to implement, cost many millions of dollars. What happened with those? Typically, they were a combination of not very configurable and flexible, or just from a validation perspective, just too costly to update. So what ended up happening is these systems rarely changed, maybe 5 or 10 years. The business wasn't getting the functionality that they needed in an ever-changing world, and the technology became obsolete. Vendors were no longer supporting these solutions. So while this may look a bit busy, it's a good thing. Having choices is good. It will force you from becoming obsolete, both functionally and from a technology support standpoint. But of course, again, having options is a very good thing. But making sure that we're managing those options and making the right choices does require a discipline. And that's what we want to talk a little bit about now, is a framework for helping you manage the chaos. So at the highest level, I'll talk a bit about roadmaps, change management, and solution governance. All of this coming back to planning. Really, the first step of any journey really should be planning. Cannot emphasize that more. It starts with a robust roadmap. Like any journey that you'll go on, you'll have trouble finding your way without a map. Your roadmap should be focused on meeting company strategies and objectives. And in order to do this, you want alignment with executive sponsors and those cross-functional leads. It's really critical to understand the business needs and to align an IT or technology roadmap to that. You want to make sure this roadmap is setting realistic timelines, achievable timelines, and budget, but making sure that we're not sacrificing key things like change management, training, and communications. We've probably all been involved on Vault implementations that can be done very quickly. I think me and my colleagues are amazed at how quickly these systems can get stood up. I mean, we've been on projects where a system is delivered within 12 weeks, and that's fantastic. But really, in order to gain widespread adoption, we need to be focused on change management, communication, and training. It's not just enough to get the system up quickly. We want people to know how to use it and adopt the system. Managing changes in Vault are key to success. So a release management plan that accounts for all things related to releases, such as roles and responsibilities of not only just IT, but your impacted business and your validation and quality partners. Defining what your process is for promoting configuration changes from your sandbox environment to your test environment to your production environment, maybe a training environment if you have that. What are your testing approaches, and what updates to validation documents may be required? This is really where the change advisory boards are critical. So if you think about, you've got your 3 releases a year from Veeva, and they do a great job with their release notes documenting what's coming. They even put their own impact assessment together. But that's something that each organization will have to look at and perform their own, because you may have a disagreement with what Veeva, an auto-on feature that they say is a low impact, may be a higher impact to your organization. So looking at what's coming in those Veeva releases and marrying that with any user-specific change requests that come in, and really just help prioritize what do we want to enable, what makes sense, and when, the timing of that. Because you may find that there are requests coming in from the business to create new workflows or add some new capabilities that are coming in a not too distant release from Veeva. So again, you may, as a change advisory board, just opt to not or to defer that and wait for the out-of-the-box capability. Again, trying to keep these solutions as out-of-the-box as possible is just another way to help manage the chaos. The network of business champions is key to evangelize the use of the system, to help other colleagues adopt the system. Again, that all can't fall onto your IT organization from a support desk standpoint. So it's really important that you have a network of change champions out there. Strong governance will keep you on your path. So solution governance helps us align with industry regulations, guidelines, and best practices. Fortunately, our friends at Veeva make this easier for us by making sure a lot of those things are baked into their solutions. So the regulatory solutions will account for ECDD standards along the way, their safety solutions, same thing. So really the power of buying applications is that a lot of that, those best practices are baked into the solution. Data governance is always tricky, and whether you have technology in place to help manage that, it's really more than technology. It's about people, processes, in addition to that technology. Just thinking about examples like in the clinical world, you have organizations and personnel objects. Well, what are our naming conventions? Is it all uppercase? Is it mixed case? For names, are we going last name, comma, first name space, last name? Things like that. It's important to set those standards up front, especially as you start adding additional vaults that will rely on some of that shared data, having to rework things later and having inconsistent naming conventions will just lead to a less than optimal experience for your business. Your planning will pay off, and by the way of a smoother, more manageable approach, making sure that you're prioritizing what's needed versus what's wanted. Adoption, again, is key. Getting people involved, those change champions, those stakeholders, getting them involved early on to just drive adoption. And then really that readiness for adding new vaults and applications. So again, having this framework for managing all of these options will help you lay a solid foundation and make things easier for you as you expand your vault usage throughout the organization. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Terry Motez, to talk about some of Daylight's insights and real-world experience. Terry?
Great, thank you, Dan. And welcome, everyone. Today, looking at this portion of the presentation, we are going to get into a number of examples. And those examples are going to be looking at adding applications to an existing vault, a new vault suite, or connecting those vaults inside or outside of the firewall. But we first wanted to take a pulse of where you are and what type of change you're considering in your environment. Is it that we're adding an application to an existing vault, which would be, adding a QMS to your quality docs application potentially? Or are you expanding to include a vault from another product suite, such as you have PromoMats today and you're looking to add a clinical data vault? The other option is to look to leverage connections across your different vaults. You'll be looking at, do you want to do your connections within your firewall? So frequently we see a RIM suite product looking to connect to the clinical suite. Or you may be looking to go beyond that firewall, connecting outside of that firewall. An excellent example is using Site Connect and within your clinical vault and using that capability to connect to an investigator site, which has Site Vault. So once the poll starts, you'll be able to select one or more answers from the listed options. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Sonia.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. And just like Terry said, we're going to do our first and only poll question for this webinar. And the question is, what type of change are you planning? And the options are below. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options: adding an application, adding a vault suite, sharing vault data through connector, connect to a vault outside of the firewall, or none of the above. This is done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. So please go ahead and cast your vote by clicking on one of the below, and then I will close the polls and share the results with everyone. I'll give you another, looks like we got the majority of our audience have cast their vote, but it looks like there's a few of you out there who have not. So I'll give you a few more seconds, and then I'll close the polls. Okay, that looks like it's the majority of everyone. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in our poll question. I'm now going to close the polls and share the results with everyone. Okay, so let's take a look at the results here. We have 29% of our audience members saying adding an application. Another 29% are saying adding a vault suite. 14% are saying sharing vault data through a connector. And then again, another 14% saying connect to a vault outside of the firewall. And then we have 50% of our audience members that are saying none of the above. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating in that poll question. Now back to you, Terry. Before we begin, Terry, what do you think about the results of that poll question?
Oh, I think that's very interesting. Thanks to everyone who registered what their plans look like. That's great that you have a number of people saying none of the above. So as we talk about what's changing, what we're looking at with Veeva application implementations, you'll be able to pick up a number of good ideas and recommendations as we go through. And I'm very happy for you. It sounds like you're ready to start on an exciting and productive Veeva journey. So we'll focus on each of those areas, the adding a vault, adding an application, and the connectors individually. But first, we wanted to start with looking at the big three themes that we see moving across all of these projects. In the daylight engagements, we have seen that there are common themes such as planning, which Dan spoke about earlier. But this, when we talk about planning here, it's going to be more on the project level rather than the governance level. So we'll look closely at that, and planning is inescapable. And then we'll take a look at rules and business process to see how those will impact the rules and business processes that are expected from your application, and also how they play well or not with the rules and processes you have defined today. And then we'll also jump into reference data and configuration to investigate how some of the new capabilities within your system will change what you're considering for your reference data. So with that, Dan, let's move on to the next slide. And we'll start in to take a look at Vault Clinical eTMF. And in this example, we'll be looking at that Vault Clinical eTMF adding either SSU or CTMS. So I want to give you some background on the example that we're going to be talking about for this, that drove a number of these observations. We had a client who launched a sponsor client who launched an eTMF Vault project. They were planning to go live with their integrations shortly after the Vault release. But while they were in the process of doing that implementation, a decision was made to add SSU rather quickly. So quickly that the SSU workshops started before the Vault Clinical eTMF was even ready to go live in production. So there was another shift in the business environment for this client, and the impact was that the legacy SSU migration needed to start just as the SSU was going live in production. Timelines for these changes were very tight. We had the eTMF project, the integrations, SSU going live, and a migration happening in sequence and in some cases overlapping. Expectations were very high, and the Vault platform was undergoing some rapid change. Although last in the deployment line, migrations required some early preparation to be ready for managing this kind of timeline. The migrations really had challenges because of the dynamism in this environment. They had not only legacy data anomalies to consider, but also multiple sources for data. Within the Vault itself, there were configuration triggers and autocomplete rules that were going to impact how that migration progressed. And then there were also the activity that was coming from ongoing Vault releases. And then equally problematic was within the clinical Vault itself. There were duplications and inconsistencies within the global directory person and organization names. So taking that all into consideration, the team's first target was to determine how the people and organization entries connected to the Vault should be connected to the Vault during the migration. Because of the duplications and the inconsistencies, data cleansing needed to start in force. Rules for master data management that had previously been resisted by this client were put in place by a slightly exhausted group of decision makers. Fortunately, the changing environment and the responsibilities of validation were managed by very strong business leads. They had a clear vision of what they needed for their function, and despite the number of areas where they had shared ownership, they worked productively as a team to manage change control requests all the way through their validation documentation. As you're looking at a project like this, we saw the cooperation of these business leaders as a definite win. We highly recommend that you're looking for these type of personalities and collaborators when you're selecting your business owners for each of those applications. But back to the project, the positive attitude was there, and that's what they desired to go forward with, but it was tough at some times. The eTMF team had already finished their configuration when SSU started. And without knowing that SSU was coming into play, they did all of their configuration based off of what TMF needed. So that meant that the TMF index, milestone master sets, and EDLs were all analyzed and put in place, but they tackled only the challenges and needs within the TMF domain. As SSU started, it became clear very quickly that there would be new milestones, changes would be needed to the filing guidance, and there would be new EDLs that needed to be opened up and reconsidered from scratch. The country intelligence definitely added the kind of guidance and control that the client needed. They had some outstanding audit findings saying that, it was not clear and that they were missing some documents within their different country collections. So the company really needed to get the project progress tracking from country intelligence, as well as a tool to assess that document completion. If you're looking at country intelligence, spend some time upfront. Getting country intelligence right requires some painstaking analysis, an exquisite attention to detail, and the cooperation of colleagues from around the globe. In a perfect world, we would have all of the decisions on how we would do country intelligence, and even rolling it back further, we would have the understanding of SSU functionality and when it was coming into play for the eTMF Vault. Ideally, you'd want to be able to consult your roadmap and understand the timing for the new functionality so that the existing project can engage those stakeholders and together build an appropriate foundation for both eTMF and SSU and avoid some of that rework that we saw in the project. For this client, early collaboration with all the stakeholders and doing the analysis homework prior to launching Veeva configurations was a key learning that they took away for the future. We'll look now at a next example for adding registration to a submission vault. So Dan, if you want to move the slide. Thank you. Turning the attention to the RIM suite, we had a customer with the submissions vault, and it had been established for years. The decision was made to add registrations. Registration data feeds your submissions, so you really want that data to flow in smoothly. The client was looking forward to streamlining the process and making registration tracking more visible and consistent. So the client opted to jump right in before doing some of that homework prior to their configuration. The questions started to come very, very quickly. They learned that the registration data model within the Vault is very different. So registrations have a data model that's based off of product, whereas submissions are based on, well, submissions. So trying to fit that additional detail that we needed for registrations into that existing data model expanded it greatly. So if you think about registrations, registrations track a multitude of details for a product. You have a medicine and the medicine's in a box, and that medicine is in a bottle with a particular size, potency, color, and more. Tracking all of these characteristics made the data model very complex, and complex in comparison to submissions. So the changes that were being introduced were impacting across both domains because of the expansion of the data that was being handled. The data model analysis was needed to quickly answer questions that had been raised in the configuration workshop. The team started to do that kind of evaluation to get those answers by working on what they had today, looking primarily at what does registration look like in the current tracking systems? Where's the data held? Other systems, other spreadsheets for that current process? And how will the data and its relationships fit into the Vault data model? Ideally, this process also looks at legacy data integrity as well, as inconsistencies and data anomalies are always best addressed in the source system prior to migration. You don't want that cluttering up your data model. Business process also played a big role here as well. You want to consider both processes and dependencies needed in registrations. If that's unclear with a system like registrations or another Vault system, engage some experts, potentially from Veeva, to walk you through how this data is used downstream so that you can get into your configuration already armed with this understanding of how that changes in the data are going to impact your overall environment. And then try it out. Determine how you want the data for your product to look. How will it be used once it's migrated? Assure that you cover different product types in your analysis because they have very different data models. For example, a vaccine has a different structure entirely. Check assumptions with other users, and don't forget to include external organizations like quality or manufacturing. Assure that they are involved with the process planning and the process review. Finally, you want to test your Vault data by matching it with data in the other environments. This environment, if it's not shared today, will be shared even more in the future. So as you do look across those additional vaults you may have, you need to be clear on who owns the particular document or data. So as an example, right, we know that a protocol is generated by regulatory, but a study may first be registered by the clinical group. The study name in registrations has to match what is in clinical, so that clinical is going to own that particular data point moving forward for that study name, although registrations is still going to be responsible for that protocol. Under great time pressure, this client made some quick decisions on how to fit data into the existing submissions vault data structure. The client had not had time to fully analyze and vet the data model before release. As a result, we saw users struggling with using the system and understanding how it was expected to work. The data organization was not clear to them because of the need to take some shortcuts when they were defining that data model and the processes. So our recommendation to help you with situations like this: pick a few products and try to add them manually. Continue until you work out the kinks. And do that data organization planning up front to avoid some of those additional costs and confusion later. Bottom line, the number one most important thing is data, data, data. So moving on, we've talked about two situations where we were adding an application to an existing vault. Now we want to take a look at what happens when you're adding a new vault suite to your product installation. The challenges can be a bit different when you are taking a look at a different vault product. In our previous case, we were working within that same domain, but now if we're looking across, we could have potentially a clinical vault, a regulatory vault, and quality vaults all sitting in different product suites. We actually had a situation like that with one of our clients. They had deployed a clinical vault and a quality vault, docs vault, almost simultaneously. They went live in production within a week of each other. And the registration vault, the decision was made to hold that, and that went live in production about 10 months later. During the initial round of configurations for the clinical eTMF and the quality docs vaults, the team leaders spent a great deal of time aligning on support processes, focusing on what the standards would be for sharing data, and managing updates, SOP updates, and aligning on standard terminology. Process decisions were vetted across those teams to identify where decisions needed to be made. That first set of deployments went very smoothly. The new registration implementation team picked up at the close of the earlier projects. Maintenance of those cross-suite standards established had struggled because of the differing processes and needs for registration. Course corrections became more difficult because the eTMF and quality stakeholders were not fully involved in those discussions. Thankfully, the source of truth for documents and data had been negotiated, decided, and documented across all of these domains prior to the start of the regulatory process, regulatory implementation, making it much easier for that team to build off of those decisions. It was after this experience that the client recognized that the late definition of cross-vault standards, rules, and the participation from across groups was key to their smooth initial implementation. In another engagement, we had a very interesting client who had multiple vaults in their domain, but each of those had kind of grown up independently within the environment. They even had a standard of naming contests to name their new vaults. So the results of the contest came in, vaults were launched into the environment, and only after that did the teams realize that they now had one vault called Veeva Vault, one vault called the One Vault, and one vault called Vault Clinical. This ended up being very confusing for IT, support teams, and the users themselves. Those name choices are very difficult to change, and as a result, they do persist today, and they still are creating some issues for this client. But they realized shortly after rollout that they could not tolerate staying with the high amount of impact that the service teams were working against, because the confusion of naming made those service impacts unavoidable. To manage the situation, the client chose to centralize the management of their vaults, their terminology, naming, and standards. The names today do remain a bit confusing, but the terminology standardization, naming, the object relationships, and standardized communications and processes has minimized the impact and made the responses proved extremely valuable. So finally, let's take a look at Site Connect. So if we want to go to the next slide. The Site Connect client that we had was very excited to bring Site Connect into their domain, because what that was giving them was the ability to work directly with the site vault at the investigator site. We're all aware of the recent pressures for remote monitoring and accelerated clinical trials. These furthered the need for the client to be able to act quickly to create these connections. The value was going to be great. It was going to relieve some of the pressure on managing the vaults, but what it would do is create a number of questions as well. The need for business decisions came quickly, such as which documents will always move from site to the sponsor and which go from sponsor to the site. A team quickly spun off to answer this question. Next, they needed to handle the question of the exchange of documents internally for regulatory and safety documents. The site vault fed in documents to the clinical vault, but then additional internal connectivity was needed to be able to share those documents across the other product suites. And finally, the sponsor needed to put together a list of document packages and when they would be shared with the site. Another group took on this responsibility to secure answers because there hadn't been a precedent for that within their domain. While these teams focused on those discussions, there were some process realizations, such as sites had to be connected when they were in a selected state. So this client had to quickly start working through how they were going to change that process internally to be able to accommodate the system need of connecting only when the site had achieved a selected state. This kind of went hand in hand with the SOP changes that we saw for that subset of sites using Site Vault, and how do they work nicely with the set of sites that were not using Site Vault. SOP changes needed to happen. We also had some major changes of how we were going to provision users. Those user accounts for Site Vault were being created by the sites, whereas the investigators for the sites not using Site Vault were being generated by the sponsor. So the need for coordination across those two different processes impacted a large number of SOPs. And then finally, the other big impact we saw was on global directory. This client had organizations identified by name, such as a particular hospital. And then to differentiate the groups within the hospital that were clinical sites, they had a location associated for that site. With the structure from Site Vault and Site Connect, those connections are made by a number assigned by Veeva called a USN number. Those numbers, the assignment of that number requires the pairing of organization and location to make the organization name. So now the organizations in global directory needed to switch from being hospitals to the department within the hospital that would be the unique organization. The client took on moving and reformatting a lot of their existing data, as well as implementing new rules for also accommodating the site records and the personnel records that were coming in from Site Vault. There were quite a few decisions to be made, and the client is quite happy. The connection's working very, very well, and they continue to focus on their communication with the sites as well as the internal teams to make certain that they are able to handle that hybrid environment where they have some sites with Site Vault and some without. So with that, we'll turn it back over to you, Dan, and see if we can bring this back in a summary.
Thank you, Terry. So to summarize, once you start down your Veeva journey, planning is a priority, which should be of no surprise. You know, I touched on a few areas of planning, specifically around roadmap, change management, and governance. And we had Terry elaborate on some of the things that need to be considered when you're either adding new vaults or vault suites or applications to existing suites. Again, document and data governance playing a huge role here, and just as much planning as you could do up front to anticipate any rework that may end up being needed by adding additional applications. So if you have the time to be able to plan these things up front, you'll just save yourself a bit of headache down the road. Hopefully everyone found this useful. Again, the slide that I showed, not trying to scare people of all the different things that are out there, all the options, but again, options are good. Just you want to make sure that you're managing that chaos through thorough planning and execution. All right, we thank everyone for attending this event. Sonia, I believe I'll turn it over to you now for any questions the audience may have.
Certainly. Thank you very much, first Dan and Terry, for that very insightful presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And we're going to put on our webcams for this portion of the webinar. Just like Dan said, we're going to do the Q&A right now. So whatever time we have, we're going to try to address all the questions that have come through from our audience members. So let me first start with this first question from our audience. Oh, and just a reminder, audience, you can use that questions window to send in your questions, and we'll try to attend to them during the time we have together. All right, so let's take a look at our first question. The question I have here, this audience member is asking, when adding new applications, does Daylight have a best practice approach for how to approach the validation deliverables? Who would like to answer that one? Who'd like to start?
I'll start with that one. So I don't think we have time to go through all the validation deliverables, but certainly one that comes up is the requirements. You know, we're well, even the Val plan, a lot of the deliverables is if you, let's say you've implemented eTMF first, and then you're going to add CTMS. Well, do you create a whole new set of validation deliverables, or do you really just modify the ones that you already have for eTMF? And our recommendation in general is the latter. So again, we think of suites. So if you have validation packages that align to a suite, like Vault Clinical, Vault Regulatory, versus the specific application. In our experience, that provides for a more streamlined approach and is satisfied, validation and quality folks we've worked with.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. And anything to add, Terry, or should we go to the next question?
I would just add that we do want to remember that having business owners and IT owners that work well together helps a great deal as you're negotiating what goes into those validation documents and how the updates are going to be handled. Who makes the decision on which pieces change?
Okay, thank you, Terry. All right, let's go to the next question. This person is saying, we don't have an MDM solution in place today, so how can we ensure data governance across vaults?
I'll take that one. Yeah, it's a good question, and I touched on it a little bit in the presentation. Yeah, I mean, the data governance is not just technology, it's people, process, and technology. So even if you don't have the technologies, you still have the people and processes in place. So again, the MDM may be some future state where you can get to a more automated way of managing your master data, but it's not required. And it's data governance, though, I would say is required, and it is something you're going to want to implement. So let's not make the lack of the technology an excuse for not doing the right thing around data governance.
Mm-hmm. Terry, anything from you?
I wholeheartedly agree. Make sure that you're paying attention to that data governance.
Okay, all right, let's go on to our next question. Do you have recommendations on how to share data with third parties that may not use Site Vault like CROs? Who would like to start with that one?
I can start with that one. Yeah,
Okay.
that's an interesting one. I mean, we see, and yeah, the CRO is a good example. A lot of times you're exchanging, I mean, the Site Vault's a relatively new application, Site Connect even newer. So there's still a lot of manual, semi-audited ways of transferring data, either emailing it, which is terrible, to more, maybe secure portals and secure FTP. But it is interesting. I mean, I think most know, Veeva Vault is hosted within Amazon Web Services and AWS, and Azure would have similar capability. We do see some companies still are able to leverage AWS functionality like Lambda and S3 storage to automate the ingestion of data. So you can imagine if you had a CRO host data to AWS, you could actually have kind of a rules-based engine leveraging AWS Lambda, ultimately get that data into a Vault Loader ready CSV file and automate the ingestion of that data using Vault Loader. So while not specific to Vault technologies, leveraging the AWS platform, you actually can use that for exchanging data with third parties.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. Okay, I'll go on to our next question. Unless Terry, you have anything to add? Nope.
No, go right ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This looks like it's our last question, and this audience member is asking, can we leverage Veeva Vault for managing documents that wouldn't reside in the development cloud vaults, like contracts and budgets? Who would like to take that one or start?
I can start with that one. So yeah, some of our larger customers, it comes up a lot, right? Well, and those examples that I may have legal contracts or something that doesn't fit nicely with clinical, regulatory, or quality, and Veeva does offer a platform vault, so it is an option to consider. The pros of that would be it's a similar user experience, a single platform for managing all documents, whether they're GXP or non-GXP. So it is something, if a customer has a need, they definitely should talk to their Vault account or Veeva account managers about the potential use to see if they're a good candidate for a platform vault.
Okay. Terry, any other words to add to that?
For the group that is actually adding that within, so say a clinical vault, some of the things that you can consider is taking a look at the classifications of those documents and the user roles, because both of those give you opportunity to restrict access so that you can store these documents securely, but make sure that only the right people have access to see them.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for those questions. We have reached the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Daylight Solutions will follow up with you after this presentation. And if you have any further questions, please direct them to the email address that's on your screen right there, and it's info@daylightsolutions.com. Okay, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, in a few seconds, I'm going to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event with that link and also share this link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that and get even more out of today's presentation by downloading the supporting materials that are available under the Handouts tab. And we have two there for you, two service briefs. One is Daylight Services and Veeva Experts. So please go ahead and check them out. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Terry and Dan, for that very insightful presentation and for answering your questions. So thank you very much, Terry and Dan.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
good
much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good rest of the day.
Thank you. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X-Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Dan. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.